Welcome back to Jump Ball, your new daily dose of NBA news and opinions. I'm your host, Sam Conrad. Let's get straight into this episode. So, during the course of last season, and of course during the offseason, we saw a lot of rumors about Bradley Beal potentially being traded or leaving the city of Washington, and obviously for good reason. There was a lot of validity to those claims, a lot of really good reasoning behind it. The biggest reason being he's sick of losing. We saw many times throughout the course of last season, he was very upset with the team. He was super just really pissed off that they couldn't manage to win a game. And eventually, towards the end of the season, they managed to kind of turn things around and finally started to win some games. But once again, they were just really, they managed to fall, not managed to fall short, but they just fell short of really any good season whatsoever. They've been a very average and subpar team for many years. And of course, last season was just like the rest. Eighth seed in the playoffs, lost in 5 games, and boom, just the cycle repeats. So Bradley Beal, maybe he wants out of Washington, but I have reason to believe that he actually might re-sign next season. Whether that's on a large extension or a small one, just to test the waters, I don't really know, but I think that there's a possibility that they bring him back for at least one more season. Right now, I will say we can't really guarantee this because, of course, it's said at the moment that he had no desire to leave the city of Washington, to leave DC, but that does not mean that it's guaranteed he's never going to be leaving. It just means that for the time being, he wants to stay, but it still does leave the door open for any potential trades in the future. Now, the biggest reason, in my opinion, why they might be able to bring him back is because I think that this team will probably surpass a little bit of everybody's expectations next year. I'm not saying they're going to be contending for a championship. I don't even think that they'll probably be like a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference, maybe not even top 6. But I do think that they'll be playing very good basketball. And I think that the future will look a lot brighter than it's looking, at least at the moment, from the outside looking in. So overall, offensively, I think that this team is going to definitely be much better. I think that they're underrated on that side of the ball in a lot of aspects, actually on both sides of the ball, but we'll get to the defense in just a moment here. So offensively, I think that some of the additions that they made this offseason were fantastic and they fit very well together, especially also when you consider the coaching change that they just recently made with Wes Unseld Jr. But to start, let's talk about Spencer Dinwiddie. I'm a huge fan of Spencer Dinwiddie, and people forget that this guy averaged 20 points and 7 assists back when Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were out for that 2019 through 20 season, I believe it was. Maybe it was 2018 through 19. I'm not completely sure, but just about 2 years ago, he was pretty much a borderline all-star player, playing very good defense, orchestrating the offense, and overall just did a very good job stepping into a new role as a potential starting point guard for this team. And I think he'll be able to do this, replicate. I think he'll be able to replicate those same statistics, that same play style back here in Washington. Even with the injury that he did suffer. It does concern me a little bit that he tore his ACL. I believe that's what he did. Maybe it was his Achilles or his MCL. I'm not completely sure, but it was a very bad leg injury. But regardless, he's not a freakishly athletic player that relies on his athleticism a lot and uses that to his advantage. Overall, he's just got a really good amount of skill to his game and uses his physical tools, such as his length, to really ultimately, perform at the highest level that he can, right? Now, I think him paired with a guy like Montrezl Harrell and a couple of other guys on this roster is going to be very good. This team, in my opinion, will be very good in transition and in a full court offense because Spencer Dinwiddie, excellent downhill player, great around the rim. Overall, has some very good court vision and is able to make those deep outlet passes that this team really needs. Montrezl Harrell does a great job running the floor, also finishing at the rim and attacking the basket. A very efficient player around the rim, freakishly athletic. He and Spencer Dinwiddie, along with Bradley Beal, actually should make a dynamic pick and roll duo. I think Daniel Gafford should also be able to be a really good pick and roll man for this team, giving them two options. Once again, kind of, to attack the rim in the pick and roll situations. Overall, I think that they have a lot of athleticism on this team. They're going to be able to run the floor really well. And I think that's going to be pretty good for this team. I think that's going to be not necessarily their main source of offense, but I think that's going to be where they get a lot of offense from. And I think that's going to make them a pretty exciting team to watch, to say the least. Now, I also think that Kyle Kuzma is going to step it up just a little bit next season, because here's the thing. We looked at him in his second season in the NBA and we're like, he's averaging 18, 19 points a game, pretty efficient, plays some solid defense. He could be a very good player going forward. But the issue is people did start to overrate him a bit, and people were thinking he could definitely be the third option on this Lakers championship contending team. But we saw that LeBron and him really didn't work too well together, and he really wasn't good enough to be the third option on a championship contender. He wasn't really good in the spotlight. All of these things kind of combined and just really tore down his, not necessarily his confidence, but his ability overall on the NBA floor. But now he's in a smaller market in Washington. He's not really going to be dependent on as much, to be creating for everybody or to be creating for himself. He can be a third option on a team that's going to be relatively good, relatively competitive, but has pretty much no expectations or pressure whatsoever. At this point, he's kind of underrated, at least in my opinion. And I think that all of that together should really help him to have a better season this year than he did last year. What I do hope to see from him, I will say, is more consistency, because while he did average, as it says here, about 13 points a game last season, he would have games where he scored 5 points and games where he scored 30. And then he'd score 25 the next night and then 2 the night right after that. Right. So he was very inconsistent. And I hope that's something that he can improve upon when he's in Washington. That would be excellent to see, because that does mean that maybe it really just needed to be a change of scenery for him to kind of break out into a new mold of NBA player. Now, defensively, I do still think that this team is going to be pretty good as well. There's a couple of guys that I want to highlight here. First is going to once again be Spencer Dinwiddie. This guy, at the beginning of this season, we saw was playing some really good defense. I mean, he was guarding the 1 through 3 at an elite level, in my opinion. Overall, he's got some very long arms. He's a very quick player, and both of those things combined, with a pretty good defensive IQ, makes for a very good defensive player in the NBA. And for a team that really isn't god awful on that side of the floor, but definitely isn't good on that side of the floor, I think that's an excellent addition to make to your team. They also did bring in Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in the offseason. Really nice 3-and-D player overall for them. And Daniel Gafford was a really good defensive center for them last year, especially once Thomas Bryant got injured. I think he did an excellent job stepping up, providing some nice rim protection and a little bit of defense on the perimeter. Nothing exceptional, of course, but was able to do more than Thomas Bryant did on that side of the ball, without a doubt. And one last guy I actually do want to talk about is Bradley Beal. People forget, just a couple of years ago, Bradley Beal was widely considered to be one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. Not best perimeter defenders in the league. That's a complete lie, but definitely one of the better perimeter defenders in the league, and was seen as a two-way player. Whereas now we're not really seeing him in that same light. And I think the biggest reason for that is because of his offensive workload. I mean, within the past 2 to 3 seasons, the amount of shots that he's been taking, the amount of offense that he's had to create, the amount of minutes he's getting each and every single night is kind of ridiculous, to say the least. And because he's putting out so much effort and energy onto the offensive side of the floor, he gets worn out and I can't guarantee this, but this is my theory. He gets worn out and decides, okay, I'm not going to try quite as hard this time going back onto the defensive side of the floor because I'm tired, or I need to save my energy, or something along those sorts. But if this supporting cast does do better, which I do expect them to do, then the supporting cast of the past 1 to 2 seasons, he should be, in my opinion, better on that side of the floor than he's been given credit for, or at least that he's been able to show us the past 1 to 2 years. And also defensively, Wes Unseld Jr. should be able to make this team at least an average to above average defense. I think that he's going to do a great job overall defensively. He's always been a relatively good defensive head coach or assistant coach. And I do think that something that is very crucial for him, not only on the court, but also to bring Bradley Beal back, is his ability to build really good relationships with his players. He's been commonly heralded for that. He's been able to build relationships with the players, and obviously kind of keep drama out of some situations. He's done a very good job controlling tempers in the past. Overall, an excellent hire for the current situation that this team is in, where they're trying to bring back their star player and, of course, still remain a bit competitive going forward to potentially build a championship contender at least one day with Bradley Beal there. So is there a chance that he leaves? Most certainly there is, because a lot of people talk about the fact that he loves DC, but I want to bring up the fact that when I thought of DC back in the John Wall and Bradley Beal era, I thought that John Wall kind of encapsulated the vision, the meaning of Washington, D.C. as a city more than Bradley Beal did. He seemed to truly care about it. He seemed to be more involved with the community and stuff like that. They seemed to be closer to him than they were to Bradley Beal. And that's not necessarily saying that he doesn't like the city or anything like that, But overall, I think maybe we're playing that playing that card a little bit too much. Maybe he doesn't like it quite as much as we think he does, especially when we bring up the fact that he's not necessarily saying, hey, I love DC. I want to stay here for my entire career. I think it's more or less that he wants to stay loyal. He wants to try to stay with one team his entire career. It just happened to be Washington, D.C. And he wants to be the guy that grinded for all of these years, that finally managed to win a championship, or that finally led his team to the promised land. And he's not necessarily heralded as one of the greatest players of all time, but is heralded as one of the best players ever on the Washington Wizards, or one of the players that did the most for the city of Washington, D.C. As a whole. Right now, we don't know if he's going to sign an extension. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. I do think that this team could definitely make it into the playoffs as a 7th or 6th seed, with a future looking much brighter a future looking much brighter in the future than it does at the moment. And I guess we'll find out around October 17th if he's at least thinking about signing an extension, because while he doesn't have to sign the extension on October 17th, that is the day that many people would expect him to sign it. If he doesn't sign it, of course, Washington Wizards fans don't be freaking out, because you can, of course, re-sign him or re-extend him at any point throughout the regular season until the extension deadline, or at some point next off season. And I wouldn't expect him to sign I wouldn't expect him to be extended anytime, honestly, in the future. I do expect him to, if he does extend his time with this team, I don't expect it to be next season, but rather next off season, when he finally kind of gets an idea of what this team looks like, how good they can be, and if this team is at least headed into the right direction going forward. Anyways, that's all I had for you guys today. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next episode of Jump Ball tomorrow. Thank you very much.